Just booked your first flight and now you're curious about what you need to know and what you can expect. In this video, I'll be sharing everything you need to know about your first flight. Today, I'll walk you through the travel documents you'll need, key baggage rules, and when to arrive to the airport.
Hey, I'm Kimberly, and this is KRod Collective, where I teach you how to travel solo, travel smart, and help you fall in love with Spain.
Now, I'm assuming you've already bought your ticket, so I won't go into finding cheap deals or buying tickets. However, I do want to mention that a lot of different airlines have different types of tickets. And some of the things that I'm talking about in this video are going to vary depending on the airline that you're flying with and the type of ticket that you bought. The travel documents that you'll need for your flight depend on where you're traveling. If you're traveling domestically, which is within your own country, most countries require two things. Number one, you'll need a government-issued ID, so something like a passport, a driver's license, a military ID, and you'll also need your boarding pass. This is what you're going to use to get on the plane, but don't worry about that. We'll talk about that later. If you're in the US, you need to make sure that your ID is a real ID. If you need more information on that to learn what it is or see if you have one or figure out how to get one, definitely check out this video right here. I've also linked it up here in the cards and down in the description box. If you're traveling internationally, you'll want to check to make sure that you don't need a visa. The easiest and safest way to do this is to start with your government's website. If you're in the US, the US State Department website has information for every country, and it will tell you if you need a visa or not, depending on how long your stay is, and it even provides links. The link to their website will be down in the description box below. And the reason why I like to start with this is because it's the safest way. There are a lot of scams regarding visas and traveling and airports, and I have seen way too many people get scammed by giving away their passport information and their personal information on websites that will claim to help you get a visa, and it's not legit. So make sure you are starting with your government's website. Another thing that you'll want to check is your passport validity. A lot of countries will require that your passport is valid between 3 and 6 months after your travel dates. So you'll want to double check based on your destination and your airline. So let's talk about luggage. Maybe you already have luggage for your trip, maybe you don't, but let's touch on what you need to know. There are different types of luggages, and they're usually broken down into 3 categories. Personal item. This is usually referring to a small backpack, a purse, small underseater luggage, or a small duffel bag that can fit underneath the seat in front of you. Next is hand luggage, and this is what we call in the US carry-on luggage. This usually refers to a small suitcase on wheels, a larger backpack, or a duffel bag that can fit into the overhead bin. And then lastly, a checked luggage. This is a larger piece of luggage that is too big to fit underneath the seat in front of you and also too big to fit in the overhead bin. And so this one is usually checked in with the airline before you go through security, and it goes under the belly of the plane. Now, you can pay to check your luggage even if it isn't a larger suitcase. And the options of how to check a luggage are going to depend on your airline. Some airlines have them already incorporated into your ticket, so something like 1 or 2 free checked bags with that particular ticket. And then with other airlines, you may have to pay an additional fee. You can keep track of your luggage weight. Is if you have a scale, you can step on the scale without the luggage, hold the luggage, step on the scale, and then whatever the difference is how much your luggage weighs. It is important to note, though, that there are certain things that you cannot put in your checked luggage, such as electronic items that use a lithium-ion battery, such as a laptop, a camera, a portable phone charger, like a power bank, for example. And a good way that I like to think about it is if it has a rechargeable battery, put it in your carry-on baggage, not your checked baggage. Both carry-on and checked luggages have size and weight restrictions. And this is going to vary depending on the airline. So make sure you are checking with your airline and with your ticket to see what those are. Some airlines are a bit stricter with enforcing these rules. I have found that airlines in Europe, for example, tend to be a lot stricter about enforcing weight and size restrictions. However, I do feel like the rules and guidelines in the EU have been changing so rapidly, so I don't find this to be the case. It doesn't seem to be as extreme as it used to be, but I do still feel like they're a lot stricter in Europe than they are, say, in the US, for example. There are also scales and these things called bag sizers that you can find throughout the airport. Sometimes you'll find them at the gate, which is the area that you will actually be boarding the plane. And then sometimes you can find them at the check-in counters. And this is where you first enter the airport before you go through security to check in for your flight. But if you ever feel in doubt, definitely find an airline employee that can point you to the right direction to check the size of your bag or the weight of your bag. Another thing that I like to use, especially if you feel like you might be say you're taking a trip and you know that you're going to be buying a lot of souvenirs, or maybe you're going shopping and you're going to be having a lot of things in your suitcase. Something else that you can do is purchase a small digital luggage scale. I love these things and they're pretty lightweight, really easy to use. All you have to do is tie it into the top handle of your luggage, pull up, and then that will give you the weight of your luggage. So you'll know how much your luggage weighs, you'll know if you're in line with your airline, and if you have more room to pack more things.
So something happened to the audio files of the second half of this video, so I have to refilm it. And I cannot wear the same clothes and pretend like it's the same day. It's not. I'm here refilming it, and that's okay. So let's move on. Let's talk about some luggage rules. So luggage allowances are also another thing that varies by airline and by ticket. There are some stricter budget airlines that only allow you to bring 1 or 2 small bags that can fit under the seat in front of you, and any additional bag that you want to bring with you, you may have to pay for it separately or buy a higher fare ticket to include those bags. So for example, we see that with airlines like Ryanair in Europe, Vivo Airbus in Mexico, and Spirit Airlines here in the US. So it's good to get a little familiar with the baggage rules and regulations of the airline that you're flying with to know what is and isn't included in your ticket. One thing you might want to consider doing is making your luggage easy for you to identify. You could do this by adding a brightly colored luggage tag to it. You can also buy colored luggage. And if you want some extra security, I would highly suggest throwing an AirTag or a tile or some sort of tracker inside. Even if you're not checking your bag, you'll still want to do this. Because sometimes as you're boarding the plane, especially if you are in the last group to board, the overhead bin space might fill up pretty quickly and you will be asked to check your bag. And in that case, you'll still be able to track it and know where it is, even if you hadn't planned on checking it. Before you fly, another helpful thing to do is go ahead and download the Airlines app. This way you can get updated in real time of changes to your flight. When you check in for a flight, essentially what's happening is you're telling the airline, hey, I booked this flight and I'm actually going to be there. I will be flying in the plane to this destination. Now, most airlines will let you check into your flight online 24 hours before your flight. And this is also where you'll usually be able to see all of the details for your flight. If you have an iPhone, I have a pro tip to sharing your flight information with your friends and family. The easiest way to do this is just text them the flight number. Once they receive it, they will hold down on that flight number and a preview box will pop up, and that will give them all the information on your flight. The flight number, the departure destination, the arrival destination, and it'll even show a tracker as you're flying in the air. I know this works for iPhone. I think it works for Android, but I think there's a few extra steps with Android, and I will go ahead and link those steps down in the description box below. Now, I know the question that a lot of people want to know is how early should I arrive to the airport? Most travel experts will say that for a domestic flight, which is within your country, you want to arrive 2 hours before your flight. And for international flights, you want to arrive 3 hours before your flight. I tend to agree with this, and this is usually what I stick to. And because this is your first flight, I would give yourself some time, arrive to the airport early, just in case security is backed up, and you have a little time to get your bearings within the airport. There are some great websites and apps that you can check to see what the security wait times are at the airport. The My TSA app is a great one that will show you wait times. There is a great website called TSAWaitTimes.com. And also, if you live in Atlanta, there's also a website, I think it's atl.com/times, that will also give you the wait times for the security in the Atlanta airport. And I'm pretty sure every airport in the US probably has an equivalent website, but I will link these websites and all this information down in the description box as well. Keep in mind that the time on your ticket and the time that you booked that flight is departure time. So that is the time when the plane is scheduled to push back from the gate and leave. And boarding usually begins anywhere between 30 and 50, 60 minutes before the flight, depending on if it's domestic or international, and of course the airline. Now, on your boarding pass, there should be a boarding time. So to quickly recap, what you need to know before your flight is know which travel documents you need to bring, double check your luggage and your luggage rules, get a little familiar with your airline, and get to the airport early. Let's talk about the layout of the airport. The airport typically consists of 3 main areas: terminals, concourses, and gates. Terminals are the main buildings where you have ticket counters, security, restaurants, airport lounges, and more. There can be multiple terminals at an airport, and they each serve different airlines and domestic or international flights. Concourses are large areas within terminals where the gates are located. So for example, you might have Delta Airlines on concourses A, B, and C, and Southwest Airlines on concourses D, E, and F. Gates are the specific areas where you board the plane. So if you've ever seen an aerial view of the airport and you see the planes are parked, they're parked at gates. Each gate is usually identified by a number or a letter or a number and letter. So as I stated in part 1, you can begin checking in for your flight 24 hours before your flight. And when you're checking in, this is basically you telling the airline, hey, I booked this flight, I'm actually going to be there, so please don't give away my seat. And there are a couple ways that you can check in for your flight. One way is on the airline's website. You'll usually be asked to put in something like your confirmation number or your last name or the airport that you're departing from. Another way is through the airline's app. For me, this is one of the fastest ways because with some of these airlines, you can opt in to their push notifications and they'll send you a notification when it's time to check in. When you open the app, the check-in process begins. And finally, you can also check in person at the airport. There are 2 ways that you can do this. You can either wait in line and speak to a person directly at the ticket counter. They'll usually ask you for your name and your ID, and then they'll manually check you in right then and there at the counter. Or you can check in at the self-service kiosks that they have. When you get to the airport, above the doors, you'll usually see signs for each airline. And once you're inside, you should see self-serving kiosks in the ticketing area. You can easily check in for your flight on one of those kiosks, and most of the time there are agents there available to help you. If you're checking a bag, this is also really easy to do. You can do this either online, in person, or at the kiosk, just like checking in. They'll usually ask you how many bags you're checking and remind you to take out any electronic items that you might have. There are certain electronic items that you cannot check in the bag to go underneath the plane. You'll also have to get your bag weighed to make sure it's in the weight requirements. If you checked a bag online, you'll need to get it weighed in person before you drop it off. Then you'll get a long slip of paper, and this is called a bag tag that you'll need to attach to your bag. So this slip of paper basically tells the airline, hey, this bag belongs to this person, and they're going to pick up this bag in their final destination of X. This is pretty easy to attach, but if you need help, there's usually ticketing agents around that can help you put the bag tag on properly. Now, there will be a small slip that comes along with that tag that they're going to give you. Do not lose that slip. You're going to need that slip in case your bag goes missing, it gets onto another plane. This has all of your information on it. So if your bag somehow gets lost, you'll need to give this little slip of paper to the agent in your final destination so they can help you track your bag. So once you get that slip of paper, go ahead and put it in a safe spot just in case you'll need it for the future. Then after you've weighed your luggage, you've got your bag tag on, then they'll usually tell you where to go to drop it off. Or if you're checking in person at the counter, they'll just take the bag from you. If you're not checking a bag, checking in online is so easy. No matter how you check in, they'll ask you a series of questions regarding rules and regulations and what you can and cannot bring on the plane. And once the check-in process is complete, you will get your boarding pass. Now, since this is your first flight, if you do feel more comfortable checking in person once you get to the airport, feel free to do that. Now let's take a second to talk about the boarding pass. This is exactly what it sounds like. This is a ticket, or if your boarding pass is electronic, it's a QR code that you scan to get onto the plane. This is an example of what a boarding pass looks like. So more or less the information that you'll find on a boarding pass are the date, the flight number, the departure airport, so the airport that you're flying out of, the arrival airport, so the airport that you're flying into, the boarding time, the departure time, your name, your boarding group, the gate, and then if it's electronic, your QR code. Remember, the gate is where you board the plane. Every airline displays this differently, but this is more or less the information that you'll see on a typical boarding pass. Without this, you cannot board the plane, so this is a pretty important travel document to have. Now, if you have an electronic boarding pass and you don't think your phone has enough juice to get you from
getting to the airport to actually boarding the plane, then I would go ahead and go to the ticket counter to have one printed or print one at home, just in case. If you have an iPhone, you can download your electronic boarding pass into your Apple Wallet. You can also take a screenshot and it'll work just as well. Now that you're checked in and you have your boarding pass, it is time to go through security. Security is usually right by the check-in counters, and if you checked in online and you're not checking a bag, once you get to the airport, you can just head straight to security because you already have your boarding pass. So there are different security lines, so make sure you're reading the signs to know which line you should be getting in. And there's also usually airport staff there that will look at your boarding pass and direct you to the right line. So security is fairly simple. You'll wait in line and then you'll be called up to see a TSA officer. And here they'll ask to see your boarding pass and your ID. Most of the time, there's an electronic scanner that you will scan your boarding pass, either electronic or your physical boarding pass. And then usually you'll hand the TSA officer your ID. If this is an international flight, you must show your ID and scan your boarding pass. Now, once your ID and your boarding pass are checked, then the officer will usher you to proceed through security. Now, there are a few important things to know about airport security. One important thing is that you cannot bring any liquids that are over 3.4 ounces. Another important thing is that TSA now has a new policy where you do not have to remove your shoes when you're going through domestic security in the US. If you're curious about other things that you should know or crucial mistakes that you don't want to make when going through TSA security, then definitely check out this video right here. Now, once you approach the actual security, right by the conveyor belts, there should be some large bins. This is where you'll put your bags and other belongings to go through the security scanner. You're going to have to empty out your pockets and also put any large electronic items that are larger than a phone in the bins. Although you don't have to take off your shoes anymore, if you do have a shoe that might be problematic going through security, they may ask you to take those shoes off. So it all depends. Now, each airport does conduct airport security a little bit differently regarding the bins and what goes inside versus what doesn't go inside. So make sure you're watching the people in front of you. And also, if you have any doubts or questions, go ahead and ask the officers. And most of the time, you'll figure it out when you get there. If you're loving this video so far and you're finding it helpful and you would love more travel tips, definitely make sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel. If you're traveling internationally, you will have to go through customs and immigration. Every country does it differently, and how strict they are all depends on that individual country's rules, security protocols, and the agreements that they may have with other countries. So during immigration, that country's government checks you, your passport, your visa, if you have any, and your legal right to enter that country. Now, this usually happens after you land or before you depart, depending on the country. Now, you might be asked things like, why are you visiting? How long are you staying? Where are you staying? And then once you're approved, they'll usually stamp your passport. Some areas have border-free agreements, like the Schengen zone in Europe, for example, which makes it a bit easier for travelers to move freely between those zones. So for example, if you're doing a Europe trip and you're traveling from the US to Spain to France to Italy, you would go through immigration once you reach Spain from the US, but you wouldn't go through it when you're going from Spain to France or from France to Italy, because that would be like flying from New York to LA, except LA is a different country. Again, if you're living in the US and you're traveling internationally, when you come back into the US, you'll have to go through security and passport control, which is immigration. So customs is about your stuff, the items that you're bringing across the border. Now, this normally happens after baggage claim before you leave the airport. Customs officers generally want to know things like, are you bringing in restricted or prohibited goods? Are you carrying large amounts of cash? And are you importing high-value items like certain food products, certain alcohols, tobacco, things like that. Now, declaring an item is basically you telling customs, hey, I am bringing this item into the country. Most countries have moved from physical customs forms to digital custom forms, but there are a few countries that still do the paper forms that are floating around, and they'll usually hand that out to you on the flight closer towards landing, and you'll fill out things like your address, the address of where you're staying, and any items that you're bringing in that you would like to declare. If there is no physical form, then you'll just verbalize what you're bringing in to the customs officer. Now, once you're through security, you'll want to find your gate. There will be large screens throughout the airport that will have departure information for various flights. Now, I would suggest double checking those screens and cross-referencing them to what you have on your boarding pass, because gate information is one of the most likely things to change. This is where having the airline's app becomes really useful, because you can also opt into those notifications that will notify you if your gate changes, and you can also refresh the app pretty quickly to see if your gate has changed. But some smaller airports, it's really easy to just simply walk to your gate. At larger airports, you might need to take a shuttle bus or a shuttle train to get to your gate. Now, once you've found the general area of your gate, you can use the bathroom, grab some food, chill, do whatever you want until it's time to board. So here's a little pro tip about charging your phone at the airport. Do not use the USB charging ports that are there. Always use your brick. I don't know exactly what the formal word for this is, but I call this the brick. So use this to charge your phone at the airport. Do not use the USB charging ports, because if you do, you are at risk of something called juice jacking. Now, since I am not the most technically savvy person, I'm going to read you something online about what juice jacking is. Juice jacking is when hackers install malware and data theft software on public USB charging stations. So when you plug your phone in, that USB connection doesn't just carry power, it also transmits data. So I will leave that at that. I will also link some crucial information down in the description box below if you want to learn more about juice jacking. So let's quickly touch on the boarding process. Now, on your boarding pass, there should be a departure time. Now, this is the time where the plane is scheduled to push back from the gate and actually leave. So the door should be closed at that time. And then there should also be a boarding time on your boarding pass, and that is the time that boarding usually begins. Now, depending on the airline and on whether this is a domestic or an international flight, boarding could take anywhere between 30 and 60 minutes. Boarding is usually done in groups or zones, and your group or zone should be on your boarding pass. Now, sometimes they'll put up signs on the gate and it'll say, zone 1 through 2 or zone 2 through 4 or whatever, and you will line up according to whatever group you're in. And other times you'll just be hanging out by the gate, and the gate agent will announce which zone is boarding. And once your group is called, you're good to board the plane. Now, depending on the airport and on the airline, for some flights, you will walk down something called a jet bridge to get to the plane. And then at others, you may have to take a van, a bus, or walk outside to get onto the plane. That happens a lot in some countries in Europe and also in the Caribbean. And it also happens sometimes at smaller airports in the US. It all depends on the airport, the airline, and how much space they have. Now, as I stated in part 1, most airlines will allow you to have 2 bags. If you have more than 2 bags, you may need to consolidate before you board. Now, in some places, depending on the country, the airline, you may board the plane from front to back. And then in other countries, other airlines, you will board the plane from the front and the back simultaneously. Again, it all depends. If this is a domestic or international flight, they usually will close the boarding door 10 to 15 minutes before departure. So you'll want to make sure you're at the airport at your gate well before that time, because if not, the airline does have the right to give your seat away, and you won't be able to board the plane once those doors are shut. So remember, departure time does not equal boarding time. Okay, now there's one small thing that I do want to touch on, especially for my international travelers, and that is duty free. So every country has taxes, right? And they're usually incorporated into the price of an item, or they are added on to the price at checkout. There is a thing called customs duty, which is a tax on goods when transported across international borders. So this tax is to essentially protect that country's economy. Now, when you're leaving an international destination to come back to your home country or to go to another country, there will be stores in the airport where you could buy things like bottles of alcohol, perfume, luxury goods, chocolates, and many more things. And some of these things are usually high tax items, so you can buy them at the airport tax-free. Now, duty-free doesn't always necessarily mean cheaper, it just means tax-free, basically. Now, most countries do have a duty-free allowance, but I'm not really going to get into all of that right now. I'm pretty sure it's a high amount. Unless you're doing something like sourcing products outside of the country for wholesale, for like a store or something like that, then it's not really something you're most likely going to need to worry about. But if you do want more information on that, check the description box below. All right, now let's talk about what happens on your actual flight. As I talked about in part 2, you can board the plane by group or by zone number, and you can find your group number on your boarding pass. Once your group is called, you'll head to the gate, scan your boarding pass, and then head to the plane. Once you get to the plane, there's usually a flight attendant there to greet you at the door. Now it's time to find your seat, and to find your seat, you just follow the seat numbers. As you're walking down the aisle, if you look up, you'll see the seat numbers. And the rows are usually identified by number, and the seat is usually identified by a letter. Normally, A is at the window, and then it goes down alphabetically. So for example, if you're on a plane with one aisle down the middle and 3 seats on your right and 3 seats on your left, it's usually A, B, C, D, E, F. And of course, this is going to depend on the configuration of that particular plane. You'll notice that the overhead bins are above the seats, and that is where you're going to put your carry-on bag. Your carry-on bag you can put up in the overhead bin, and then if you have a personal item like a small backpack or a purse, you can put that underneath the seat in front of you. Let's talk about seat types. So window seats are really great for views and for leaning your head against the wall to sleep. Aisle seats make it really easy to get up at any moment and stretch your feet and also go to the bathroom. Middle seats aren't really the greatest, but hey, sometimes you gotta sit where you gotta sit. There are seats called emergency exit seats. You'll usually find these in the middle of the plane or towards the back of the plane. Wherever you see an emergency window or an emergency door, that is where the exit seats are. In these seats, you'll usually get some extra legroom, but you are gonna be responsible for helping in case of an emergency. Also, depending on the configuration of the aircraft and whatnot, these seats may not recline all the way, or they may not recline at all because there might be another emergency exit directly behind it. On some planes, there are seats that are not exit row seats themselves, but they are directly in front of an exit row, and those seats also might not recline all the way because of the exit that's directly behind them. And also, depending on the airline and their particular rules, if you're seated in an exit seat, you may or may not be able to store any items under the seat in front of you. And depending on the configuration of the plane, we'll have a tray table that's in front of you. There's also a button on the side of your armrest, which you can push, and if you push back, your seat will recline. There are some exit row seats that it doesn't look like it has a screen or a tray table, but the tray table is normally located in the armrest, and then the monitor is usually located a bit below. You have to push a button and pull up the screen that way. But then again, it does depend on that specific plane. There are different types of airplanes, and the plane that you're on is going to depend on your airline, obviously, and also your destination. Some planes have a single aisle right down the middle, and these are usually used for short-haul flights or for domestic flights. And there are other larger airplanes that have 2 aisles going down the middle. So sometimes they have 3 seats or 2 seats on the right-hand side, an aisle, 3 seats or 4 seats in the middle, another aisle, and then 2 or 3 seats on the other side. And sometimes with these larger planes with the double aisles, these seats might be a little bit roomier, and you might have some extra amenities and maybe even a nice meal. So for me, I find that planes tend to run colder. Now, this isn't always the case, but I usually like to either dress in layers or bring a light jacket or coat or blanket that I can use as a cover up in case I get cold. In winter, I'll usually use my coat as a blanket, but I also like to bring a blanket like this. This is a great travel blanket. It can fold up, it can double as a pillow, and it also has a trolley sleeve so it can fit right over your luggage. I would also recommend wearing things that you feel comfortable in, items that are not going to restrict your movement in any way, especially if it's a longer flight. You also might even want to consider wearing something like compression socks, and also I would highly recommend wearing closed-toed shoes. Some flights have free Wi-Fi and free entertainment on the seatback screens that have things like movies, shows, podcasts, music, games, but not all airlines and planes offer this. Some planes don't have any screens at all, so you can come prepared by downloading your own shows, your own podcasts, and even bring a book or an activity to keep you occupied during your flight. This also ends up being very helpful in case you have any sort of delay. For staying comfortable on the flight, you want to make sure that you are hydrating. You can bring an empty water bottle that you can fill up after you've cleared security at any of the water fountains in the airport. You can also bring your own snacks if you want to. If you're curious about what kind of snacks you can pack for travel, definitely make sure you check out the description box below. I have some ideas down there for you. If it's a longer flight, Set an alarm, get up, stretch your legs, just walk up and down the aisles, go to the bathroom. You can also bring an eye mask or a neck pillow, something like that to just keep you comfortable. Keep your charger handy just in case there is a charging port or a USB charging port for your phone or any of your devices. I have a small bag that is always packed that has a few in-flight essentials and just a few essentials for my trip in general. If you are interested in packing something like that and you want to know what's inside my travel essentials bag, you can definitely check out this video right here. Not all flight experiences are created equal. With some airlines, you have to pay for things like snacks, drinks, entertainment, even water sometimes. They're just cheap flights. They have decent fares, and they're just there to get you from point A to point B. Anything extra, you'll have to pay for. But with other airlines, you might get a drink or a snack that's already included, and then on longer flights, you might even get a meal service and free drinks. So as I said in part 1, make sure you're checking the airline's policy and the particular ticket that you're buying, just so you're not caught off guard. So your flight and most flights usually go a little bit like this. Once everyone has boarded, the boarding door or the boarding doors will close. A safety video or a demonstration will play. Then the plane will speed up and take off. You may feel some pressure in your ears as you go into the air or once you get in the air, and that is normal. The pilot may or may not come on and make an announcement and also turn off the seatbelt sign. It just all depends on what is happening on your particular flight. Then you'll be on the plane. You may or may not have a service. Now, while you're in the air, you may experience some irregular or sharp movements of the plane, and this is what we call turbulence. Then once it's time to land, the pilot will usually come on and make an announcement about being on the descent. The flight attendants will usually come through and do their final walkthrough, and then once you land, you'll taxi to your gate. Once you're parked at the gate, then usually the pilot will turn off the seatbelt sign, and then the boarding door or the boarding doors will open, and then you're free to grab your belongings and get off the plane. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. If you checked a bag, then you will need to normally pick up that bag in baggage claim. As you're exiting the airport, you'll need to follow the signs that say baggage claim. Once you're in the baggage claim area, there's usually a big screen or signs that will tell you which belt or which carousel goes with which flight number. Then you'll go to that carousel, you'll wait for your bag. You may see it, it may not be there yet. Grab your bag, and then that's it. If you're doing an international flight, you'll have to go through customs and immigration, and that's it. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, you've just made it through your first flight. Really hope this video series was helpful for you to give you a little bit of confidence and to kind of show you what you might expect. If you're looking for more travel tips, definitely make sure you check out this playlist right here, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.